The notion that global warming is a war by the mainstream media against Christianity is a complex and multifaceted concept that has gained significant traction in recent years. Proponents of this idea argue that the media's emphasis on climate change is a deliberate attempt to undermine Christian values and promote a secular, liberal agenda. On the surface, this claim may seem far-fetched, but a closer examination of the issue reveals a more nuanced reality. One of the primary arguments made by those who believe that global warming is a war against Christianity is that the media's focus on climate change is a thinly veiled attempt to promote a secular, scientific worldview that is incompatible with Christian values. They argue that the emphasis on human-caused climate change is a way to shift the focus away from God and onto human activity, thereby diminishing the role of faith in people's lives. This, they claim, is a deliberate attempt to erode the moral authority of Christianity and promote a more secular, humanist worldview. Another argument made by those who support this idea is that the media's coverage of climate change is often infused with a sense of moral urgency and judgment, which is seen as being at odds with Christian teachings. The language used to describe climate change is often apocalyptic, with terms like catastrophic and irreversible being used to describe the potential consequences of inaction. This, they argue, creates a sense of fear and guilt that is designed to control people's behavior and promote a particular ideology, rather than encouraging them to make informed choices based on their faith. Furthermore, some argue that the media's emphasis on climate change is also a way to promote a liberal, progressive agenda that is at odds with traditional Christian values. They point to the fact that many of the policies designed to combat climate change, such as carbon pricing and renewable energy subsidies, are often supported by liberal politicians and advocacy groups. This, they claim, is evidence that the media's coverage of climate change is not just about reporting the facts, but about promoting a particular ideology that is hostile to Christian values. However, it is also important to note that many Christians are actively engaged in efforts to combat climate change and see it as a moral imperative to protect God's creation. They argue that the biblical mandate to care for the earth and all its creatures is a fundamental aspect of the Christian faith, and that climate change is a critical issue that requires a Christian response. This perspective challenges the idea that global warming is a war against Christianity and instead highlights the ways in which Christian values can inform and guide efforts to address climate change. In addition, it is also worth noting that the media's coverage of climate change is not uniformly hostile to Christianity. Many media outlets have featured stories about Christian groups and individuals who are working to address climate change, and have highlighted the ways in which faith can inform and guide efforts to protect the environment. This suggests that the media's coverage of climate change is more complex and nuanced than a simple war against Christianity narrative. In conclusion, the idea that global warming is a war by the mainstream media against Christianity is a complex and multifaceted concept that reflects a deeper cultural and ideological divide. While there are certainly some who believe that the media's emphasis on climate change is a deliberate attempt to undermine Christian values, others see it as a critical issue that requires a Christian response. Ultimately, the relationship between Christianity and climate change is more nuanced and complex than as simple as versus in narrative, and reflects a deeper conversation about the role of faith in public life and the ways in which Christian values can inform and guide efforts to address critical social and environmental issues.